All right. Ready to start?
Just a minute.
They'll come in. Hello, everyone. Good morning. We're getting ready to start our next panel. Welcome to the home of the Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas. This is an annual pavilion that we work with all the ministries of agriculture of the hemisphere, and ICA helps coordinate that along with all of our partners and friends, some of who I see here today. Thank you again for making this possible. My name is Margaret Ziegler. I'm the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture's representative in the United States, and we're really happy to have today with us our partners from Canada, and they're from Canada and other parts of the world as well. And I'm going to turn it over now to the moderator, Barb from Canada. Take it away, and thank you for coming to the pavilion.
Thank you, Margaret. It's wonderful to be here today. So I'm Barb Swartzentuber. I'm the Managing Director of the Canadian Alliance for Net Zero Agri-Food. And today we're joined by members of that alliance called CANZA, a groundbreaking national alliance uniting the entire agri-food value chain. This collaborative effort is dedicated to mobilizing investment, scaling up innovative projects, advocating for bold policies, and creating market incentives to mitigate 150 megatons of emissions from Canada's agri-food system by 2050. Here's a little bit about who we are and our mission.
Canada only has 7 years left to reduce its emissions by 40%. That's 7 growing seasons. But what can happen in 7 years? They say it takes a village. It also takes academics, industry, government, farmers, all working together to unlock Canada's potential to feed the world with low-carbon agriculture. Through climate-smart farming incentives, Canadians can be an answer to a global problem.
I really do believe that we can be the solution that the majority of the world's looking for.
We've been given a gift to solve one of the most pressing issues in human history.
Projects, they move at the speed of trust.
We need to start working together and look at it as an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity to get innovation coming into agriculture.
So what can be done in 7 years to ensure the next generation won't inherit the weight of the world? Let's help Canadian farmers tackle the biggest challenge this generation will overcome for our children.
So, as you heard in the video, time is short, and now is the time to act. And CANZA is working on 2 signature initiatives. One is related to catalyzing agricultural biodigesters across Canada. And the second is our Climate Smart Farming Initiative, where we're working very hard to develop a low-cost, reliable measurement, reporting, and verification system for soil carbon. Our panel today is going to dive into that initiative in more detail, but I want to share a video with you first that speaks to our first pilot project in Saskatchewan, where we're developing the prototype for that system.
I always say that my definition of sustainability is to leave my land, my financial statements, and my industry, and my community in a better state generation after generation. I think in today's world, collaboration is key in order to move fast and move smart. So the collaboration between private and academics and an actual farm. So the project we're doing here is really how can we use data and technology to make hitting these net zero emissions targets possible on farms at a mass scale.
CANS is a remarkable initiative, a true collaboration between the civil society movement, between some of Canada's most important and impressive, powerful corporate players, some of Canada's best scientists, and critically serious engagement both at an institutional level and at an individual level with the producer communities, the farmers that actually produce the food. So this is a collaborative effort to address the climate change crisis. Although we know carbon in the soil or organic matter in the soil is super important, it's actually very hard and very expensive to measure it.
Traditionally, what we do, we bring back some of the soil samples and we analyze them chemically in the lab. But the issue of this standard or traditional method of soil carbon measurement, either through chemical laboratory method or through dry combustion method, is that it takes a lot of time. Equipment is very costly. So the challenges lies is the cost, labor intensive, and time consuming.
We started to work with an amazing large-scale farmer in Saskatchewan who has farms of almost 40,000 acres of land. And the goal of the Climate Smart pilot project is to work with Christian and other farmers like him in order to better measure the way their farm practices affect greenhouse gases. If we want to create financial incentives that reward farmers for doing the good work, we need to be able to measure, verify, and report on what they're actually doing.
We are collecting soil, we are collecting spectra, we are collecting images and trying to bridge the gap between laboratory accuracy versus this new technology.
We are using imaging spectroscopy to take an image of the soil. With the machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques, we are processing those images and try to estimate soil organic matter from those images. The same way, if we shoot a light to the soil produces some sort of reflectance back. The spectroscopy is that we try to get that reflectance back from the soil, and based on how much of a reflection we are getting it back, it is associated to the different properties in the soil. Second technology we have is imaging. We have this imaging technology on hand to everybody. So why not we try to build something that we can utilize these imaging devices like your cell phone or smartphone to take a photograph, and that photograph looks at the soil. But soil contributes different color. If you have a more organic matter, often you get a blackish color soil, less organic matter, lighter color soil. Another technology we are trying to bring up here, which is the data collection technology in a large area. So this is where the remote sensing technology comes in. Remotely, we can monitor larger area. And if we do develop a relationship in one place, using the remote sensing technology, we can scale up this whole process. That means if we can develop that relationship one place, we can try to relate back to the other place at a particular time, but also we can trace back in time between the two time points how much of a change happened.
If we don't get it simple, farmers will not do it. And so here's what, you guys coming from the university thought it was this hard, and here's where farmers need it to be. Here's where you thought it was going to be. This is where it is. We got to get it to here or people aren't going to do it, right? I think in a perfect world that it's in my generation, not my kids' generation, that carbon becomes one of my key crops.
One of the key things that we have to be doing right now is developing the tools to create this green economy or this carbon market.
All my crops are basically exported. We don't have enough people to eat everything we grow, and the world doesn't have enough food to eat. What if carbon could be one of those revenue streams for farms? I think that'd be pretty exciting.
We need farmers to be adopting farm management practices that turn the taps on carbon dioxide, for instance. We need to have systems that reward farmers for absorbing greenhouse gas emissions and becoming part of the solution.
New problem require new solution. And new solution cannot be developed by a single person or single dimensional view. And the alliance of people, organization, industries can actually solve that problem. We cannot hide our problem. We need to solve it. And this is why the alliance could help.
Okay, we're going to dive right into the panel discussion and start with the star of the video, Christian. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but the question I have for you is, you know, you've been right there ready to work alongside CANZA, and you've opened up your farm and your data. You do that with many organizations, with researchers. But why do you think this project is important from your point of view?
Yeah, so I'm Christian Hebert, farm in Mooseman, Saskatchewan, Canada. So it's really cold in the middle of nowhere right now. But from the video, I mean, as you can see, we started out as a pretty small farm. We've grown quite a lot, and a lot of that is through collaboration. We've also had a pretty heavy focus on the utilization of technology and data in our operation. I kind of always like to mention I'm a recovering accountant, so I did my CPA education and fell in love with numbers, and it was the numbers actually that brought me back to agriculture more than farming itself. So we've had a pretty high focus on the utilization of data and technology in our operation to make better management decisions, which then as we've grown and met a lot of the companies that we're working with, it's the data and technology that allows us to collaborate quite a bit, more simply than maybe some operations. When it comes to the MRV, at a high level, I would say I personally struggle, but a lot of farms struggle that a lot of the current narrative kind of labels farmers as the villain of climate change, when in fact, I think we're the solution. As I said in the video, my definition of sustainability is to keep our land, our financial statements, our community, and our industry in a better state when the next generation takes over. And the number one piece of that is obviously my land. And if we do a bad job of taking care of our soil, especially the organic matter portion, I mean, the only people I'm kind of screwing over is my grandkids, and I don't really believe farmers would do that, nor do I believe anybody would do that. But we have to remember the other pieces of financial statements, community, and industry, and it's really hard to go green if we're in the red. And a lot of farmers maybe aren't at the critical mass in size to invest in some of the technologies and the data collection required currently to be part of some of the global MRV systems out there. When it comes to our community, I can't implement all the management practices we implement if we don't have a great team of people. And so literally something as small of an issue as keeping people living in rural Canada or rural portions of other countries where agriculture is done is a huge piece to the climate change story. And the last is industry, and how do we keep telling our story around the world, as the internet has allowed agriculture to become a global industry on the story standpoint, not just the growing the food standpoint. So I think that's why it's made it pretty difficult. As I said in the video, I think the biggest thing is simple. How do we take something, a lot of farms in Canada, if you ask them what MRV in the world of climate insets and offsets or carbon insets and offset was, couldn't answer that question. So that's where we're starting. And then how can we get it so that it can be implemented on mass acres? Because acres are really what's going to affect climate more than, farmers are managing those acres. And it's to get it simple, and it's going to be the utilization of data and technology and management practices to do that. So that kind of leads to why we decided to collaborate with CANZA, and we collaborate with a lot of other industries. But the first point why we do it is, in order to move in today's world, you need a whole bunch of different viewpoints. And so the CANZA collaboration is pretty interesting in that there's companies and our farm and academics from all areas of what we call the Agri-Food chain. And we talk lots that we need a net zero agri-food cycle, not just the farm, not just the manufacturer, not just the supplier, but the whole life cycle of agriculture, and that's the exciting part. I think there's an immense opportunity, as I said, that carbon can be a crop that I export. From our initial data points and what we found so far, not only do we believe that we're sequestering carbon, especially in Western Canada, where practices like zero-till have been widely adopted for a number of years, but I mean, we're starting to see lots of practices such as the treatment of nitrogen to reduce emissions, variable rate control, sectional control. On our farm in particular, I mean, we've had 4-acre grid soil tests back to the early 90s, and that data set is what's kind of allowing some of the work to be done on the MRV program. So it's the opportunity that's allowed, my willingness to collaborate with the companies. I truly believe that it's a revenue opportunity for farms, and I think that's good for the whole industry. The more revenue that farms have leads to net income, and net income leads to investments and better futures. currently, you know, smaller farms maybe only have enough net income to survive and make debt payments. That doesn't leave a lot to invest in technologies we need to really completely capture the carbon opportunity out there. So that would be the opportunity side. When I talk about simple, like I said, I think right now there are quite a few skeptics in the agriculture crowd around carbon. And I mean, if I showed you, if you were in that video on my farm in Saskatchewan, it is hard some days to understand that there might be a problem. I mean, I walk out and my dog can run away, but he can't really run away because I can see him for 2 miles, right? The sky's clear. There's green grass everywhere. You know, if you walk out the back step of my house, you can drink a coffee and see a 1 mile field of canola with the yellow leaves, you know, blowing in the wind. So that skepticism partly comes from what we see, especially in Western Canada, but also in lots of parts of Canada. The second piece is that when you're an export only, you know, majority export industry in Canada, it's hard sometimes for them to see the value add through that food chain. And when it gets to consumers, you know, as farmers, we understand what we're doing is important. We have to feed the world, but maybe don't always get a global enough view and feel that there's just maybe more taxing and regulation coming down on us instead of incentives and opportunity. And I think that's one of our biggest worries. I mean, I've told John this lots. I think my biggest risk in agriculture in the next decade is policy. It's not Mother Nature. It's not management ability. It's not access to capital. It's really bad policy. So that, you know, that kind of led down this too. But that's where I think mass adoption of the practices. So let's show the opportunity for money to flow for 3 things in agriculture. 1 is emission reduction. 2 is a carbon inset market, voluntary carbon inset market within the agri-food chain, and then make the MRV system, you know, manageable and simplistic enough for farmers to actually even be part of a carbon offset system. And I think, you know, as I say, if you put money and smart people in a room and really cool things happen, that's where innovation happens. So if we can get revenue streams to flow to the farm level, Canadian farmers have been some of the most innovative in the world. I mean, I farm literally right around what the Vaterstat, they call Vaterstat plant now is, but that's Seed Hawk, which is one of the original zero-till implements in the world. It's right in the middle of my farm, right? Zero-till was born in Saskatchewan, so born in Canada. And that wasn't when all the policy was coming in around carbon. That was just because it was better for our soil. So I think if you can get that money to flow to the farm gate, I mean, farmers are entrepreneurs, and there's more entrepreneurs in the world of agriculture than almost every other industry. So we just need 1, for them to believe in the opportunity, 2, make it simple, and 3, get money to flow down so that they aren't skeptics.
Yeah, and help them manage the risk of the transition.
Yeah, you know, the risk of the transition as they invest in these new technologies.
Yeah.
It always some of these investments are large, right? I remember even when zero-till machines came out, you know, you might add $50,000 or $100,000 at that time for a drill with those technologies on it, and that, as everybody knows, everything in the world is worth more money now. So the investment in the proper technologies and data collection it's a large investment, and it's a long-term investment, but it comes out of current cash. And so that part is part, you know, a part that the farmers need help with.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that sets us up nicely to talk about the need for financing and support. John, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but I wonder if you would talk about the work at the RBC Climate Institute, that you've really been instrumental in shining a light on the challenges and the opportunities in Canada's agriculture system as we transition to the future. From your perspective, and also, you know, your personal perspective, and from the perspective of a financial institution, looking ahead, why do you think this work is really starting to gain momentum now? And what do you see as some of the most important opportunities for climate-smart agriculture?
Great. Well, thank you for the question, and everyone for being part of this discussion. This is an amazing moment in COP that we're talking about farming. That we have a leading farmer here who's come straight from Saskatchewan, almost straight, to share his experiences and insights. And we hear a lot of rhetoric at COP about moving from ambition to action. Well, here's our action hero. And we need more action heroes at COP. And that's a bit of what we're trying to do at RBC. So as Barb said, my name is John Stackhouse. I work in the office of the CEO at RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, which is Canada's largest bank, one of the 10 largest banks in the world, and we are seriously focused on net zero for a couple of reasons. First of all, the planet needs it. It's going to be catastrophic if we do anything else. But we also see this as an economic opportunity, and we hear this from our clients across all sectors who are transitioning and innovating, like Christian was talking about, and we want to help them with that. We want to be their partners in that journey. So to help, we've set up what's called the RBC Climate Action Institute. And the word action is very deliberate in the middle there, because there's a lot of talk around climate. That's important. That will continue. We do a lot of research through our economics team and our policy team. But we also want to work with our clients in different sectors, like CANZA in Agri-Food. We're doing the same in the building sector and in the in energy systems and right across the economy to help our clients work on systems change. A lot of them are doing their own thing, but they need to collaborate through the value chain with their competitors, but also with policymakers to avoid that risk that Christian mentioned about policy missteps in the years ahead. So how does this work on the ground level? We published, you asked Barb about the money, so I'll talk about the money. We published a report a couple of years ago called the $2 trillion transition. And that's the amount that we think Canada is going to need to mobilize over the next 25 years of capital to get to net zero, $2 trillion. It's about 3% of the economy. You may have heard numbers in the $100 trillion range for the global economy. We think this is entirely possible, but it's not going to happen on its own. So we're breaking it down by sector. I've been thinking at this COP about all the talk about the big bucks. You hear about the billions allocated for this and that. That's necessary, but we also got to focus on the little bucks. We got to focus on the small amounts, and it can be in the millions, which is a lot of money. I'm not diminishing that, but those relatively small numbers are as important as those billions and trillions, and we see that in ag. So we're working with Christian, but the supply chain to create a value chain where we can reward farmers and the soil preservers for the work that they're doing and demonstrating the capture of greenhouse gases in the soil. This is eminently doable, so we're working with Nutrien, but also with some great food companies, Maple Leaf, McCain, Loblaws, the biggest grocery operator in Canada, to develop that value chain, the inset model that Christian was referencing, so that we can transfer the value. And we're a bank. This is what we do. We know how to be an intermediary, but we need to create reliable data sets and methodologies so that there's credibility, that there's confidence in this by not just by the public, but by the firms and the investors that are investing in this, as well as the operator at the end. So we're working with the University of Guelph and the University of Saskatchewan. It's important to have that scientific collaboration. We're working with BCG, the Boston Consulting Group, which is developing frameworks for this, and working with provincial governments, because in Canada the provinces have jurisdiction over most natural resources, including agriculture, but also the federal government, because it tries to stitch everything together. Last point is on the imperative for this. We all know there's a food crisis in the world. There's an energy crisis, but there's a food crisis as well. We see it at the grocery checkout level, but we see it in social disruptions and political disruptions pretty much now on every continent. This is a driving force both in democracies and non-democracies. We don't see any indication of this letting up in the coming years. We need to produce more food as a planet. Canada has to be at the forefront of this. We think we can export 25% more food as a country over the next decade. We're going to need people like Christian to help us do that, but we've got to do it with fewer emissions. So we've called that Canada's moonshot, as we think this is an exciting science effort, but it's an economic challenge as well. But the world's going to need that food, and the world's going to need it with fewer emissions. It's that economic model and all those little bucks that are going to flow from us as consumers, as well as producers through the value chain to help farmers like Christian in Canada, but also around the world.
That's great. I like the little bucks analogy, because sometimes it seems overwhelming not knowing how to start and where to start. And if there's one thing about CANZA that's important, it's starting, as you said, with action-oriented projects on the ground with people like Christian. Tim, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. You're from Nutrien, and you sit as one of the founding partners on the CANZA initiative. And Nutrien's working on a comprehensive carbon program, empowering growers to accelerate climate-smart agriculture, including pilots on the ground that focus on nitrogen. Can you just share a little bit more about Nutrien's work in this area, and then why you joined this coalition, and the importance of collaborative platforms and collaboration in making this happen?
Absolutely. Thanks, Barb. Good to see you again, Christian, John, and Eric. I'm Tim Favre. I'm Vice President of Sustainability and Stakeholder Relations at Nutrien. We're the world's largest fertilizer manufacturer and crop input, crop input and services provider. We have operations in North America and South America, and a large retail network across Australia and those regions as well. We sit upstream of farmers, and that's a unique position. We work directly with close to 600,000 growers in those regions where we operate, and through our retail network, use over 4,000 crop consultants and agronomists to help farmers, ranchers, growers to be successful, to improve their yields, and to do it in a more sustainable way. Interestingly enough, too, there are other industries that depend on agriculture. We always talk about food, but the fiber space for clothing the world and new emerging biofuels are super important to this conversation as well. Because those growers of growing those crops also need to be sustainable and can have lower the carbon intensity of their products. So I guess it started just before COVID when an idea came. I was actually working at one of our other partners, Maple Leaf Foods at the time, and we had just taken that company carbon neutral, the world's first carbon neutral food company. And for a downstream actor of the farmer in that value chain, the biggest category in their Scope 3 emissions is crop inputs and feed for animals, because Maple Leaf's a livestock. I'm not going to steal anything from Eric here. When we look at our footprint at Nutrien, the biggest impact of our Scope 3 is downstream of our operations, and that emissions generated from the use of our products that we sell. And so Nutrien and Maple Leaf got together and we said, you know what, there's something here we can do. Something here we can put the farmer, the grower at the center of this intervention, drive incentives for practice change, but we need to measure the outcome. And so how are we going to do that? As a fertilizer producer, nitrogen is a big focus, obviously. When we look at downstream actors, Scope 3 emissions as well, the production of fertilizer and those crop inputs is a big part of the overall inventory. So how are we going to do that? Well, as we decarbonize our Scope 1 and 2 emissions from our nitrogen production, our potash production in Saskatchewan, that reduced carbon intensity will trickle down through the food value chain. And that's super important. Since 2018, the company's already reduced our Scope 1 emissions by 8%, our Scope 2 emissions by close to 18%. And that work is still ongoing through innovative technology on carbon capture and storage and other innovations that we can invest in. When we approached the pilot project idea, we collected very willing farmers in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. Canadian farmers are quite engaged on this and said, will you work with us? Because we need to figure out how we can measure this. And in year one, we basically paid them for their data and their insights. A few dollars an acre, I think it was $6 an acre for the data, but also to start measuring nitrogen use on the farm, coupled with their precision agriculture that they've already adopted. Because you can improve your nitrogen use efficiency through the sophistication of those pieces of equipment. We measured the nitrogen outcomes and actually found out that we have been able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because without that data, they could be over applying nitrogen on one part of the field, not good for a business because you're spending more money on that crop input, which is expensive, but under applying on a different portion of the field. The outcome in general is going to boost yield overall, hopefully reduce input costs for the farmer, but as well, at year 2, we started rewarding them for the carbon outcome based on the Canadian carbon price that's there. The objective was to develop a carbon inset, which we could then claim on our inventories, our scope downstream inventory, Maple Leaf Foods upstream inventory. And I'm happy to say that the independent certifier that we worked with, SustainCert, has now given us a certified, verified pathway to produce carbon insets. That was an unlock right there. And that's one of the important reasons by participating in these groups with CANZA, like CANZA, is that science, innovation, value chain actors have that ability to unlock these pathways. And we're not going to be able to scale it unless we all work together. So super, super important. We also have a parallel program in the United States working on carbon offsets, working with Climate Action Reserve. Those markets are going to be really important for agriculture. And the most important piece of that is that we have sound science. We've done the math right, the data, the verification, and then the downstream actors and the upstream actors will be able to make those claims credibly, reliably, and avoid the greenwash that we all know is very prevalent in the marketplace. So
true. And congratulations to Nutrien. That's no easy feat to accomplish.
It's a 2-year journey, right?
Yeah.
Just to get where we were. And,
yeah.
you know, just to pick up and pull the thread on something you said, Christian, and something that I've been hearing at COP now for the last week, is that there's tension out there with agriculture because it is so complex. But we need to drive to simplicity as well, right? And that's, you know, the big brand owners think that that can just happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight.
No,
it's going to take multiple years of research, and that's what CANS is about as well. We don't want to duplicate those efforts. We want to leverage what's out there, the protocols, current MRV programs, but bring it together so the farmers can move faster, scale faster.
Terrific, thanks. And that was a great setup. Eric, I'm going to throw you the question. Please introduce yourself as well. But I'm going to throw you the question. Tim talked about we have to find the way through complexity to simplicity, and a number of the panelists have talked about data is probably at the core of that, how you collect it and manage it and make it easy for farmers and for the whole value chain. And the North American Meat Institute has introduced an industry-wide data framework. I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about your experience in developing that framework, and what do we need to understand about data and data security and everything that goes with it, because that's such an important piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, I'm Eric Mittenthal, Chief Strategy Officer at the North American Meat Institute. Our members are the meat processors, and we've worked really closely with them over the last few years to develop a sustainability framework called the Protein Pact, which is both a sustainability framework that's aimed to be consistent across our membership, but also tying together the various elements of the supply chain in each of the individual species sectors that exist. Sustainability in the animal protein space has largely evolved in very species-specific ways, and we saw the opportunity to try to bring those together under one umbrella from a data perspective, and ultimately show progress towards ambitious targets over time. Tim Favre, when he was at Maple Leaf, was very instrumental in helping us create that. And as an association, as an industry, we really had no history of collecting data from our membership in any way until 2022. So really ambitious undertaking to change a culture where data sharing was not the norm to become something where it is the norm expected, and we're really able to use that data to show progress. And so we've been able to successfully do that over the last couple of years. And data security for us has been the #1 question we've received from day one, to make sure that anybody sharing data with us can be confident that the data is secure at a time when there are many cybersecurity risks out there. We worked really closely with data security professionals to ensure that the data management system that we created had the proper standards in place. Folks much smarter than me when it comes to data security is concerned, but we brought in the people who know and made sure that they evaluated our system really thoroughly and could tell us that it is secure, and they vouched that it is a secure system that the industry can be confident in. Once we kind of nailed down the data security piece, making sure that we're showing value for our members in the industry is the next biggest piece that we've really been focused on, and making sure that companies receive business value for actually sharing data with us as an association. And so what we're able to do is they provide us data, we receive it in an aggregated way, and they receive data back. It's data that they do not have access to anywhere else because it's very unique to our sector. And so they're able to see how their companies compare to others across the industry, as well as their peers and individual species types, allowing them to make their own business decisions about priorities related to sustainability. Some companies may be doing really great in terms of measuring their emissions. Others may see themselves not as doing as well as their peers, so they can determine how to make the investments that will catch them up and hopefully raise the tide for all. In addition to that, we've been really working very closely with the producer sectors in beef and pork and poultry to make sure that our measures and standards are consistent, and trying to tie the data systems together, because as we know, not one individual sector can make the big difference when it comes to climate change. It has to be everybody working together. And so we are working closely right now with the National Pork Board in the U.S. to combine data systems and allow the data to flow throughout the supply chain, working with beef and poultry as well to evolve that. And so it's a process. The combining the systems is a very complex piece, and making sure that the value really flows throughout the supply chain. And so we want to make sure that as we're getting data from the farm, that we're able to provide the data back to make it valuable to the farmers as well, and make it useful for everybody. So it's a process that is we're still working through. It's a time-consuming process, but we see the value in it. We've seen the value in getting data from members and working towards our ambitious goals towards 2030.
Thank you. That's great. I think it's been a great demonstration of the importance of the full value chain, and I think about it in a circular fashion. It starts with the farmer, it leads back to the farmer, but it has to be a value and an opportunity for the entire value chain. Thank you. I have more questions for the panel, but I'm wondering if there's any questions from the audience. I think there's a mic.
Good morning. Thanks very much. That's a great presentation. And I think this is a question for Christian, for John, and for Tim. And kind of I want your relative perspectives. I'm fascinated by the use of the insets versus the offsets. And many of us are involved in offsetting schemes, as they're called. I don't like that word, but that's the word it is. Versus insets. And insets seem to be kind of the lowest hanging fruit, if you'll pardon the metaphor change. But I'm just curious as to where you see the relative value. Is insetting more valuable than you think offsetting will be? And your use as nutrient of purchasing the insets, how does that work from a compensatory perspective? So hopefully that's clear.
So maybe I'll just jump in. We as organizations that have aligned with science-based targets and emissions reductions are going to need to demonstrate that we are reducing our scope 3. In agriculture, our scope 3 is the largest piece of the emissions pie, right? And scope 1 and 2, technology, emissions reductions from manufacturing, they're pretty easy to measure, right? From a scope 3 perspective, as accounting measures go, they should be able to be double counted, because my scope 3 emissions are Christian's actually scope 1 and 2 emissions, but they're also John's scope 3 emissions as well. So if there's going to be an intervention, how are we going to be able to account that we all came together and show progress, claim progress, or even for some organizations in that value chain, actually reduce their scope 3 inventories in a credible way so that their accountants can assure that they are. That's the carbon inset piece, right? Greenhouse gas accounting protocol has drafted scope 3 accounting that we are following in this effort. And we were part of that pilot project when Nutrien started with Maple Leaf Foods on that. We followed those protocols and then asked Sustain Cert to independently verify that. Now, we don't sell the offset, right? We co-invest with other value chain actors to demonstrate causality by their definition. It's kind of like additionality, but they're calling it causality. If we are able to prove that, measure it, certify it, we should all be able to make those claims on our inventories or how we choose. So there's no financial transaction in selling a carbon inset. It's an accounting measure that we can all share. Whereas offsets, as you know, hard offset, sell them at a certain market price, retire them, and then you can make your claim. We think actually this is the future, right? At the inset market, right? And it's within your supply chain, right? Offsets can be anywhere around the world, but it's very meaningful to drive that in your supply chain. John, I know you.
Well, maybe two words to add to that. One is confidence, and the other is simplicity, Christian's word.
Yeah.
The inset model helps us build confidence in the economic transfer that takes place. We all know that the offset market, or the larger voluntary carbon market globally, is challenged. It's been a rough year, and there's lots of good questions, some maybe not so good questions, but growth is a bit slow. We need those markets, inset and offset, to grow much faster. We need to 100x it and fairly quickly. We can do that faster, more cleaner with insets. We think it's also important to build confidence in this idea that you can transfer economic value through a supply chain. Debatable point, but I would suggest that we've seen more climate progress in the last 2 years than we've seen in the last 2 decades. And there's only one reason for that: massive fiscal subsidies. IRA, but we're seeing this elsewhere in the world. Guess what? They work. Guess what? They're not sustainable. Governments are running out of money. So what's the lesson that we learn? Money is powerful. It drives change. Great. Great to see that. But it's going to need to be non-governments, i.e. markets, that are going to have to subsidize, or choose another word if that word makes you uncomfortable, but to transfer the value instead of from the taxpayer to the producer through the value chain from one actor to another. We're doing this at a very simple, small-scale level now, but I hope what we're learning in agriculture not only can be scaled in agriculture, but can be used in other sectors to create that economic transfer that is critical, fundamental to climate action.
Yeah, I mean, I have to stick with simple. I mean, we all heard Tim's answer, and from someone that spends more time than he wants to in the carbon world, I understand everything he said. 99.9% of farmers don't understand 3/4 of the words he just used on the carbon offset model. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying I don't think we can scale it rapidly, right? So, from my relic perspective, as you said, I think that's one of the hugest opportunities of the inset market, is that we should be able to break it down to specific management practices that can be implemented on a farm, which then leads to inset trading dollars and emission reduction incentives from government. I kind of think there'll be two pieces to that, right? I've said this to the ministers in Canada before, that I think that the market can be part of the inset model very quickly, which then, for how I said my goal of a net zero food chain, like it allows that since we're talking mainly about Canada, right? The Canadian agri-food sector, if it could lead the world in net zero, it's a pretty big opportunity for Canada, and it allows all those actors for the money to transfer up and down that chain, right?
And as more value chain actors start to get involved, because we know it's not just a grocery retailer buying from a farmer, right? There's all these intermediaries within that food system. And as more come in, we'll be able to identify that. Now, GHG protocol hasn't developed that kind of trading mechanism yet. That's in the future. Yeah.
But the market without GHG protocols, the fact of the matter is there is a cost for Scope 3 emissions. And if science can prove that this level, i.e. farmers, can either reduce emissions or, as our data is showing, sequester carbon on top of that, I mean, there's money that have to go out for Scope 3 emissions, and there's scientific proof that emissions can be reduced and carbons be sequestered at this level. Like, the easiest way to create a market is to have a buyer and a seller. And the tax side of Scope 3 has created an open buyer. So there's a whole bunch of protocols, I agree, but I think the market's going to come together quicker than we expect.
I might add to that the markets are more than buyers and sellers. They require technology, data, and some form of regulation to give people confidence. And one of the things that we're early days, but seeing here is the development of that infrastructure, of the data systems, of the technologies, of the supervision of this kind of transfer. And that can become a foundation that can be used in other inset models or other broader markets.
Any other questions? Oh, in the back.
Thank you for that. That was really great. My name's Sue McCluskey. I'm the Special Representative for Australian Agriculture. So there's a couple of themes there I'm interested in picking up on. I'm also a recovering accountant and a farmer. So, Christian, you talked about why it's important for you to be investing in your soil health, investing in sustainable practices on farm, and then we heard about others in the supply chain. But you also called out the challenges around government policy, as you see being one of the big threats really coming over the horizon. I'm just interested in where you see the role for government policy levers in the value proposition for farmers. So all of those farmers you talked about that don't know how to gather the data, that are so busy doing their farming, but this is coming to us and we're going to need to gather the data and report it. So one of the things I'm trying to grapple with is what can governments do so they don't fall into the subsidy that creates perverse outcomes situation, but where they provide the right interventions and don't have an adverse impact on the market.
Am I taking the first run at this one?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's funny, we got a question very similar to this at the CANZA launch from the Canadian government. And I think my first piece of advice was that, currently we use the word carbon tax quite freely, which is really not well taken by farmers. So I think there needs to be one area of carbon incentives, i.e. an investment in climate smart technologies that farmers can access. So for instance, if your farm size doesn't allow you to invest in the technologies that we know help. One would be zero-till, fairly widely adopted in Western Canada, not so much in Eastern, right? Things like soil testing, which leads to zone mapping, which leads to sectional control and variable rate. Those types of technologies are an area where we know a government investment, cost sharing, incentive can lead to an outcome of emission reduction and carbon sequestration, which helps with an inset market, but I don't believe wrecks the market, because it's just helping them co-invest in the technology to get the outcomes we want. So that would be one example where I think government policy could become fairly helpful of the agriculture industry on some of those practices, especially when something like the MRV framework comes out and shows here's some key areas and management practices that can be measured, and reported very quickly, verified, to move through the inset market or the offset market, right? But inset market first. So, I think that's one of the big keys of this MRV project, is to get that part simple, which relates right back to 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't care, 10 management practices, depending on your region, that'll flow right through that system. And I think the investment in those technologies to help on the management practice side are important. On the data side, so Barb and I talked about this ahead of time. I mean, I think farm data is probably one of the biggest opportunities in the world right now, because the majority of it is pretty close to the average person's treadmill, very much unused, right? Yield maps, if lucky, get printed off in a binder and collect dust on the edge of a desk. They probably, in most cases, haven't even been verified by, secondary weights, etc. If anything, they're crop by crop, not field by field or acre by acre. So I mean, it's something that we've been working through, because we've taken pretty good pride in our data because of my recovering accountant side. You can't completely get rid of it. But I mean, so we have all the data when it comes to all of our management practices. We've collected LiDAR data on the whole farm, because elevation is significantly affecting the carbon outcomes on an acre by acre basis, which we didn't understand at the start of the project, to the point that, when it comes to water cycles, we have 4-foot soil probes every couple thousand acres on our farm, measuring how the water is moving through the soil, at what inch the roots are starting to pull water from throughout a growing season. And it's an area of farm data that the more I learn about it, the less I understand about soil, right? Like we're pretty good at understanding the top inch and what it does for us. There needs to be a lot of investment in understanding, call it 4 to 5 feet of soil that the root system is using. So I think there's some money that should be invested there. I use our protein innovation clusters in Canada, right, where the federal government invested lots of money. One of them that's been a success is the PIC concept in Saskatchewan. And I was bugging Senator Rob Black on his soil survey work that the best thing they could do would be to soil test every acre in Canada with federal money, and then invested in SIC clusters, right, the soil innovation clusters. If we could take soil test data and LiDAR data across the whole country on all productive land and make that publicly available, I think you'd see extreme collaboration between public and private, move it forward way quicker than government could.
Yep. Anybody else want to get in on that? I think.
Well, I'll just quickly rattle off a few things governments can do. One is tools, so helping especially smaller scale farmers invest in whether it's the drones or the LiDAR tools or other tools. Secondly, skills. So often overlooked, just continue to invest in green skills, but particularly for the agri-food sector. Third, the framework. We're working on an MRV for Canada. I know Australia's been making progress there as well. Don't make it too complicated, too onerous, but ensure that it allows for that innovation. And then maybe the last thing to think about doing is how to create carve-outs in terms of your national carbon budget or your emissions budget, and be able to say to a sector, okay, we think the farmers of Saskatchewan can take out 5 megatons over the next decade. We'll give you kind of innovation space for that. We're not giving you a free pass, but we're not going to hold you to the highest standard in the world for this. And in our national accounts, we'll say, okay, 5 megatons, done. It's good. Maybe we have to return to it, but we're not going to audit it to death, and let you innovate with that and have confidence in you. But that then gives kind of the national impetus to it that, okay, we've just taken 5 megatons, so for Canada, we've got to get 720 out. There's 5, thanks. Christian and team in Saskatchewan for doing that, and maybe that becomes modeled elsewhere.
Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, sure.
This is a first.
And please bear with me. I've been typing it into my phone so I don't sound stupid when I ask it. But from a technology point of view, because we're here in technical roles and not involved in your sector or organisations in any way, but have listened intently for 5 days about the South American agriculture more than anything. And obviously we've gone a little bit north from today. Can I ask how difficult it is to get the generations, probably the elder generations, of farmers to take on board the fact that technology and data capture and share is the way forward, but coupled with their knowledge and their experience? And is there actually a process, a fixed process for doing that?
Beautiful question. Christian,
so
you're working in a multi-generational farm.
Yeah, so I got lots of friends in South America, and I was telling them the only thing different in Canada is the rats and snakes are smaller because of the frost. But it's definitely an issue, right? The average age of the Canadian farmer is between 57 and 59, and I actually believe that's pretty normal in most agriculture producing countries, that 58 to 63 is the average age of the management team of most farms. So yeah, I always used to joke with my dad that his VCR still blinked 12 o'clock. And yes, I said VCR, right? We've only made about 7 changes since then. But at the same time, my dad's 63 years old. He's on our farm every day, has a smartphone. He has a Hebert Grain Ventures email account. We use Voxer, which is very similar to WhatsApp for all of our team communications. The biggest thing is team buy-in. So one of the hardest transitions is on a lot of farms that are smaller. It's just father-son or father-daughter. Well, the problem is if you want to implement something, that's 1 vote yes, 1 vote no, you lose, right? You stay the same. I actually think growth has helped us a lot for 2 reasons. One, the average age of our team is probably more 35 to 40. I'm 41, so the team's kind of in that 30 to 40 range. So my dad loses the vote, right? But the second part is the one thing about what I'm going to call, the farm dad, farm mom era of that 55 to 70-year-old farmer. They've never been scared of risk and growth, right? They had to work harder every day to get to where they were. They didn't necessarily have to work smarter, right? They came through the 80s of high interest rates, and had to innovate and use zero-till in order to keep soil around. So change and innovation was always part of them. We just have to make them understand that the utilization of data and technology in today's world is no different than doing better financing and high interest rates and utilizing zero-till to make your soil better. It's kind of the new landscape of change, right? But that in my mind, where John said this investing in skills would be a great part. But to be honest, just proper investments on how to have a succession change so that you have leadership decisions starting to be made by people in the age of 35 to 45 or 50 versus 65 to 70 allows that change because it gets bumped up the priority. But I mean, I'm part of, when I moved home in 2004, we were 3,000 acres, right? I kind of started making all the management decisions in 2008, and we've grown, 10 plus X. So yes, it can happen, right? And it's just, I think sometimes we maybe spend a little too much time butting heads in the succession change, but it's not just agriculture, it's all small business. If your family owned a tire shop or a grocery store, it's the same thing, right? And I'm sure you guys see it in RBC and Nutrien, right? Old exec way versus new exec way. It can change quickly as long as everyone keeps their mind open to it. But, you guys come from the tech side. If I was to sit down and explain to you how much data is available on land and agriculture and what there could be, you guys would salivate at the utilization of AI. And, most farms haven't even downloaded ChatGPT, let alone used it, right? And it's a huge opportunity. I mean, I told Barb earlier, I probably need to hire a full-time programmer and get all of our data into AWS to start layering and start using AI even more. But even our farm isn't necessarily big enough for me to allocate a full-time salary and the AWS investment, and we're 30+ thousand acres. So what is a 2-acre farmer in Africa or a 1,600-acre average farm in Saskatchewan, and lots of the Australian farms, same thing. How do we get that investment ability for it to happen? Because, as we said, we need money and smart people to have change. So if they're just smart but don't have the money, we kind of miss out on the innovation part.
That was a beautifully worded question. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I see we're running out of time. Last word, make it a few short words. What do you think needs to happen in the next 12 months for us to really unlock these opportunities across the value chain that we've been talking about today? I'm going to start in the far end. Eric.
I just think the power of collaboration and business value is really so key. I mean, I think the example that CANZA has set on the collaborative model is exactly what we need throughout agriculture, and so that's really the most important thing.
Tim.
Data integrity. You can't manage what you don't measure, right? So we really need that to scale fast.
John.
And speaking of measure, we need an MRV framework in Canada, measurement, reporting, and verification. We're working on it through CANZA. It can't be too complicated, but it's got to be sufficient enough to give that to give that confidence. And I really hope the confidence grows, not just in the general public, but in younger generations. I was astonished at a survey Nutrien put out recently showing generational attitudes towards a bunch of things. But it was shocking how Gen X and Gen Z or Z were much more skeptical of farmers and their work on sustainability. And I thought, wow, that's something we've got to work on collectively. So hope we can get at that.
Christian, last word.
Yeah, so I think I'd focus on two things. One is mindset. I think collaboration is key, but everyone in that collaboration has to have an open mindset of what is possible and focus on the opportunity, not the negatives, within that mindset. And, two would be, I read the same survey, right, is that in this supply chain that we're talking about, part of the reason I would say Gen Y and Gen Z have that feeling is more and more people are more and more generations away from a farm, right? Good friends in the US or South America talk about 5, 7, 10 generations. In Canada, lots of times we're maybe 2 or 3. So that story is only going to get harder, right? So I joked with Dave Mackay, the CEO of RVC, that I really like people with dirty fingernails because it means they've been in the dirt beside me. And we, as farmers, we need to welcome that group or any group to our farms and not be worried about it, whether that be a grade 3 class, right? And I mean, we got grade 3 classes pushing Smarties into the soil to explain that that's how a seed goes in and hopefully that's what grows, right? To the point of large multinational companies, because a lot of the executive team haven't been on the farm in a long time. So, I mean, we've had a couple bank CEOs out this harvest to just ride in the buddy seat of the combine, right? And they're absolutely amazed by the end that, like I joke, my operator's job is to keep the seat switch activated and turn it around at the end because technology allows the combine to pretty much do everything else now. And I can monitor all of that from my phone and measure it and share it with people. So as farmers, I think one thing we've done a bad job of is marketing, of telling our own story. We just assumed the world was going to trust us. We didn't necessarily go out to tell the story. We just experiments and multinational companies would come to COP and speak on behalf of farmers. But it's not, it's great, but it is not the same as, I'd love for everyone in the room to be able to drink a beer later tonight, snap a picture of a Q code, and see my 9-year-old daughter and 11-year-old son, running through our barley crop, and then watching that barley crop flow through a sustainable Canadian agri-food system to lead to the beer you're about to drink. That's where we need to get to in agriculture, whether that be your beer, your cereal, your flour, your bread, like all of that, so that when we do a survey, that doesn't come from the grocery store or the liquor store or Safeway or Sobeys. No, it came from Christian's farm in Saskatchewan.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end. I wonder if you could bring our last slide up because it does have a QR code. We are releasing our MRV framework for soil carbon, and it does speak to many of the things that you heard here today, including the cultural change that needs to happen in order for this to really take hold, and the technology changes as well. So I want to thank you very much and invite you to follow along at what's going to be happening in Canada over the next years. Thank you.